Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to my bowl/college football playoff predictions. The season is starting to come to a close, but honestly, I didn't even think about it really. I thought all the college football playoff games would kind of happen in their own category, like they have. But we get a lot of good football games. Yep, a lot of good football games for quite a while, dude. Like the season is not over. It's not even close to over. There's still so many games that are separated throughout the rest of the year, and we've got a lot of good games ahead of us, a lot of which are on the screen. But let's get straight into this thing without saying too much. A like and subscribe, help, a comment always helps. Let's get right into this thing. So to start it off, we have to do Navy versus Army. And this, I feel like people are going to really quickly pick Army in this one, and so am I. However, I think you can expect this one to be a good game. This is big-time rivalry, and these teams are both in the same category of football. One of them has seemingly been better than the other, and while Army does on paper look like they could absolutely kill Navy. I mean, Navy got shut out 35-0 by Tulane. Tulane got shut out 14-35, so not necessarily shut out, but they lost 14-35 to Army. If you're looking at that, that's where things can get crazy. But I have a little bit of a theory I like to call the college football triangle theory, where you get these happy little triangles of games where it doesn't make sense. Like for instance, Clemson beats Georgia, Georgia beats Alabama, Alabama beats Clemson. And Clemson kills Georgia 52-0. Georgia beats Alabama 23-20. And Alabama beats Clemson 38-10 or something like that. There's these triangles throughout college football and even in the NFL that don't necessarily make sense. So when it comes down to looking at how teams have played each other, it doesn't necessarily matter as much going into the game. You have to look at the actual facts here. And the fact is, this is a big-time rivalry. These teams both specialize in the run game and the read option and whatnot, triple option. And they both have relatively good defenses. I would say Army's defense is a lot more solid than the Navy defense. But you can expect Navy to show up in this one. You could definitely expect that. And I think you're going to get ready for a big, good football game between these guys. It always is. Memphis versus West Virginia. Funny little game because Memphis is 10-2. West Virginia is 6-6. Memphis is favored, but this West Virginia team has been very all over the place this season. This was a West Virginia team that I favored a lot this year, and I thought was going to be pretty doggone good. I mean, they have some impressive. They don't really have any impressive wins, but they have some very high scoring games, which to me looks like they have a solid defense. Really, one of the lowest scoring games they participated in this year was against Iowa State. That was the lowest scoring one. Memphis, on the other hand, here, they kind of haven't really played anybody special. They have a big-time loss to Navy, and then they dropped one to UTSA, and they turned it around and beat Tulane on the road, which was the big one to put them on the radar. But this team, Memphis is barely scraping by, while they also seem to lean on some of the offensive, and they've also had their games where their offense performs poorly, mainly against Florida State is where I'm looking. Yeah, while they beat them 20-12, that's a low-scoring game against a competent defense, because Florida State, if anything, has had a defense this year. And Memphis has struggled with the competition in the AAC. And I think West Virginia, I know their quarterback is going to play because they've kind of been going through a couple. So at least one of them is going to play. And West Virginia most recently just got absolutely embarrassed by Texas Tech. They're going to look for a bounce back. And I think they'll do it in a high-scoring affair against Memphis. I think they will win this game. Sorry, Memphis fans. But this is not a 10-2 Memphis team like a couple years ago. This is a 10-2 Memphis team now that just hasn't really played any impressive competition. Cal versus UNLV. Cal's kind of been a little bit of a forgotten team for good reason. They're 6-6, but UNLV has kind of remained in the rankings in their FART conference. But we got to remember, Cal opened up the year with a win on the road against Auburn. They almost beat Miami. They lost by a point. Should have beat Pitt as well. Should have beat Florida State. Lost to NC State by uno punto. Uno punto. Killed Oregon State, all right? That's a big one in my opinion. They absolutely swashbuckled Oregon State, who is playing competition in the same respective conference. UNLV beat Oregon State, but not really on the same level that Cal did. Cal also performed well against Syracuse. The worst game was definitely against SMU to pretty much close out the year. This team has competed fairly well with the ACC competition, but UNLV has a top run defense and has played fairly well. Barely lost 2 games. They barely lost in overtime to Syracuse and barely lost early on in the season to Boise State, but most recently got dominated. I'm going to take Cal in this one. All right, originally I was going to take UNLV because it seems like the obvious pick with record and ranking. But again, this is Mountain West to Power 4, and Cal has had some extremely good performances. Unless there are players sitting out for this game that I'm not aware of, Cal has the performing offense and a solid defense to shut down UNLV. And I think they will because, again, UNLV, while they do have a good win against Kansas kind of blew it, and UNLV barely won. I don't know. I just look at UNLV, and I say Mountain West. That's all. Indiana versus Notre Dame. First playoff game. And this one is fabulous, in my opinion. This one could be the best playoff game in the first round, but there's 2 other ones that are quite obviously better, but this one could end up being like the best game is what I'm saying. Like, obviously you could determine best games by looking at the ranking and the matchup, but it might not amount to anything like Georgia versus Texas. But then you'll get another game like SMU versus Clemson that was really good, or Penn State versus Oregon, even though you would have said Georgia Texas was the best. You know what I'm saying? All right, whatever. Indiana at Notre Dame. Indiana, we got to talk about this team. This team is going to be the heavy unfavorite in the fan pick. Notre Dame is favored by 7.5 here, but key wins for Indiana, Michigan. That's pretty much it. Other than that, I mean, they've been killing opponents that haven't necessarily been like the worst teams. I mean, we got to also note that their 56-7 domination over Nebraska actually was a pretty impressive win. UCLA started off the year definitely struggling, but they even dominated there. I mean, Indiana absolutely swashbuckled all the competition and took their anger out on Purdue after their Ohio State loss, shutting out Purdue 0-66. Kind of crazy game there. But we got to look at the Ohio State game and say, Indiana, if you don't commit those special teams turnovers, or special teams points, I mean, you're taking off 14 of Ohio State's 38, but I mean, I would say momentum was killed, which was why that led to that. You take away all that, this game is still within reach, and Indiana is still playing football here. Indiana can perform on the road against good teams. They are a good team themselves, but Notre Dame, another team that has been silently disregarded and has the hanging burden of a loss to Northern Illinois over their head that this team cannot live down. Every time Notre Dame is brought up into an argument, you will see the words Northern Illinois. You will see it, and they kind of deserve it because that was a terrible loss. Now, if Northern Illinois was like undefeated to this point and like practically in the college football playoff, we could, be like, all right. But they're not. And that loss was just god-awful. One of the biggest upsets ever. Notre Dame gets the 7 spot, Indiana gets the 10, and these teams are going to duke it out. And I think for the first bit, again, like how Indiana performed against Ohio State, I think Indiana is going to perform very well against Notre Dame before things slip away. Like, you could see this game being a close, low-scoring game in the first half, like 10-14. and then just continuing to be a close game where it's like 17-20. Notre Dame's defense causes some turnovers, gets pressure on the quarterback, which was a big one against Ohio State. When Ohio State was just getting pressure on the quarterback for Indiana, Curtis Rourke, I think his name is, if I remember correctly. And he was making some bad decisions, and the offense collapsed for Indiana when they were getting pressure on the quarterback. If Notre Dame can utilize that correctly, they could shut down Indiana offensively, but Indiana's defense is kind of slept on. They're pretty solid. And I think that's where things might get out of control, maybe like early or late in the fourth, some bad turnovers which lead to touchdowns, however it may be, and Notre Dame wins this one relatively handily. These are two teams I would definitely look out for, though. When whoever wins this matchup is definitely a scary team moving forward, but I think Notre Dame is the much scarier team right now. SMU at Penn State. SMU is a team that is going to be a heavy underdog going into Penn State. The time of this game is a question. What's also you got to know is these are at these teams. These are road games for these teams. So, at least for like SMU and Indiana, they're road games. We have to note that because that's going to play into these games a lot. This one is an early game, so Penn State doesn't get the benefit of the night game. But SMU should not have lost that game to Clemson. They were the better team. Clemson just played absolutely perfect football for the first time ever, and we got to watch out for SMU as well because they have a team that can compete. The question here is they can do the same thing. They can do the same thing like they did against Clemson, where the crowd and the lights get to them too much and they make early mistakes. And I think that might happen again because this team just doesn't seem like they are they don't seem like they're experienced enough. They have a lot of young talent and a lot of potential, but I don't know if they're too experienced yet under the lights. This team definitely looked shaky against Clemson. While they almost brought it back, they look shaky. So I'm going to give Penn State the benefit of the doubt here and say they're going to win by the same score SMU just lost to. I'm going to say Penn State pulls this one out. However, SMU can win this game. SMU can win this game. I feel like that is definitely a possibility here. SMU has been very solid this year. They've only taken 2 3-point losses. I feel like they might be on their way to their third, but Penn State's defense has been exposed by Oregon. While Oregon definitely has the best offense in the league, in my opinion, their defense, there is openings and there is ability to move the ball, is what I'm trying to say. And SMU definitely has an offense and a quarterback that can move the ball, and it's going to be down to SMU's defense stopping Penn State, which I think that's where Penn State will thrive. I think that's where Penn State's going to score a lot of, and SMU might make some turnovers and mistakes. Ultimately, if this was on a neutral site or at SMU, I would be taking SMU here, but it's at Penn State, which I think is just going to be a lot of pressure on SMU. Clemson at Texas. Cade Klubnik has really surprised the world. He had a horrible start to the year against Georgia. I mean, awful. But first game of the year with a new team, and it's a big one on a neutral site against the number 1 team in the country. A loaded team as well, who's number 2 right now, and the SEC champion. Can you blame Clemson? Well, also, you got to note that the score was like 6-3 going into halftime. Clemson has a pretty solid defense, and Texas offensively has not found a way to improve. I think if they put Arch Manning in and maybe utilize him more, this team can maybe find some offensive potential, but the problem is Sark is going to ride his quarterback out, Quinn Ewers. And Quinn Ewers has not had a good year. He did not have a good game in the SEC championship. And Clemson has a pretty doggone good defense, a hard-hitting defense. And Cade Klubnik, presents the problem, in my opinion, that the quarterback from Georgia presented, and it was that his ability to run. That was pretty much something that the Georgia quarterback ended up doing late in the game, which pushed them forward enough to win. While he was throwing the ball, it wasn't like the prettiest throwing the ball. I think Clemson definitely needs to throw the ball down the field if they want to beat Texas. However, I think that's going to be really, really hard. So I believe I think you can see a lot of screen passes offensively from Clemson and a lot of quarterback runs, a lot of designed quarterback runs, or Cade Klubnik running out of the pocket. And once they focus their attention to Cade Klubnik so much, if he succeeds in running the ball, then the middle of the field opens up and suddenly we have a ball game. But I think Clemson offensively against really good defenses, I'm not sure if they're going to be able to get out to the offensive power they need to off the start. I think they're going to struggle running routes and throwing the ball early, and running the ball is definitely not an option. Running the ball has not been Clemson's strong point this year. Their running back is not the same as he was last year. I know it's not the same running back, but there's definitely a major missing piece there. And so this one is really going to come down to the air. It's going to come down to the air. Cade Klubnik has to throw or run the ball to his best ability if he wants to win this game. And I don't think that's going to happen. I think Clemson can get some early points, maybe even get a turnover defensively to put them in scoring range. But quite frankly, we've seen a matchup like this for Clemson already. That was against Georgia. That was on a neutral site as well. Now you're heading into Texas, and while you do have a spirited Clemson team winning your respective conference and getting into the college football playoff when you didn't think you would, Clemson might have some fire in them, but I think Texas's defense is just way too strong. It's just way too strong. I think Clemson's defense will do solid work to Texas, but ultimately, when it comes down to it, I think Texas is just going to win this ball game by, who knows, maybe they'll kick 6 field goals in this one. I don't know. Maybe they'll kick 7 field goals in this one. But I think Texas is they're going to strangle this team like those snakes do. They're just going to choke it out. I don't know how to explain it, but they're just going to beat them. That's all. They're a very, very solid defensive team. And then ASU will have to play this team, which both of these teams are super scary for ASU to play, but we'll talk about that, whoever they may play when the time comes. Tennessee at Ohio State. This game is juicy. I think these teams are very similar. Tennessee offensively has actually they've actually been a lot better than I've given them credit for this year. They've definitely done a lot better. I really was looking at this team like how I look at Texas. Funny that they're both UT. I was really looking at this team like how I look at Texas. They have a very good defense, but not a good offense. That isn't actually the case for Tennessee. They do have a pretty solid offense. They have the numbers and they have the games to prove it. They kind of look like Ohio State. The question is can they go into Ohio State and win, especially after Ohio State just dropped a bad one to Michigan? I don't think so. I think it'll be close, but Ryan Day's got a job on the line, and all of a sudden, I think you can see Ohio State, who's being disrespected and disregarded right now, very disrespected and disregarded. I think you could see them win and potentially make a little bit of a run in the playoffs. Ohio State, again, they have the talent. They absolutely have the talent. And they are a very solid team. We cannot forget that this team, before they lost to Michigan, was literally talks to win the national championship. Like, this was the team to beat Oregon and whatnot before they dropped that stink ball of a game to Michigan. If we just erase that Michigan game from our memory, let's just say they won, but they didn't play in the Big Ten championship because a meteor hit Ryan Day and put him in the hospital for that game, and Penn State got the automatic bid, Ohio State would absolutely be getting all the talk they were getting before, and the team has not changed. They may be a bit demoralized from the Michigan loss, but They only want it any bit more. This is their last opportunity right here, and also Ryan Day's last opportunity. I think Ohio State's going to win this one. And out of the college football playoff games, back into some of the bowl games. Syracuse at Washington State. Washington State dropped one to Oregon State and then most recently lost to Wyoming, who Wyoming is awful. Give me Syracuse by a lot. Iowa State at Miami or versus Miami. Oh, did this say at? Oopsies. It is not at Washington State. It's just versus. Iowa State versus Miami. This one is a really fun matchup. Cam Ward definitely is looking at the matchup and watching the tape of the ASU game, and he's smiling right now. He is happy. He's going to perform very well offensively. And I think Iowa State is also going to perform very well offensively against the Canes. Now, Iowa State looked competent in the first bit of the game against ASU. I mean, they were going down the field before a missed PI call on ASU. And this team looked like they were going to make it a close, tough game. But once that kicker missed that field goal, it was pretty much like officially wraps. I think on the 4th and 1 deep pass, it was wraps. But I think it was also when the kicker missed that thing by an absolute mile that the game fell apart. And ASU is just eons better than we think they are. In reality, Iowa State is still a very solid team. Don't blink. They have great receivers, a very solid young quarterback with huge playmaking potential, 2 big running backs back there. They just have a bad run defense and a pretty iffy pass offense. I thought their pass offense was supposed to be much better, but they struggled a lot. But Miami also has Damian Martinez and then, of course, Cam Ward, who can also run the ball. I think you could expect a really offensive matchup here, but give me Miami by a small margin. BYU at versus Colorado. Shouldn't say at. That's probably going to happen for a lot of these games. It's just automatically written into my brain to make it like that. What's funny about this game is I just don't know why it exists. Like, why are BYU and Colorado playing each other? I mean, everybody wants to see it, but I don't think it should make sense because they're in the same conference, and that just proves that we need the Pac-12 back. If we're getting teams in the same conference playing each other in a bowl game just because they didn't play each other in the regular season. There's so many teams in these conferences that teams like this aren't even playing each other. So they get to play each other in a bowl game. Very weird. Although we all want to see it. Colorado, 2 possible Heisman candidates. Shedeur just missing out of the Heisman conversation. But then Travis Hunter obviously neck and neck with Gene. Really, I think the popular vote says Gene, but I don't know which way it's going to go. It could go Travis Hunter's way. I'm not sure. But I think BYU is forgotten about right now. Let's not forget they have a road win against SMU right now, who's in the college football playoff. They have a 5-point loss to ASU. While they did get dominated for a lot of that game, they could have brought it back. They almost did if he didn't overthrow his man and throw an interception. And they lost to a very hot Kansas team. All right, that Kansas team is the worst one. That is single-handedly keeping them out of the college football playoff right now. But, I mean, other than that, they have a very quality win and a very quality loss, which, in my opinion, is something that Boise State holds true to themselves, is a quality loss. They're one of BYU's only 2 losses is to the 4 seed right now. So, in Colorado, on the other hand, they have a bad loss to Nebraska, like a really bad loss to Nebraska. Home loss to Kansas State, which doesn't look too good, and then a domination at Kansas. So both of these teams are fond of losing to Kansas. And I just look at how Kansas State beat Colorado on the road. BYU absolutely killed Kansas State. Colorado struggled way more against Kansas than BYU did. I mean, Kansas had to score like a last-second touchdown to win that game. And ultimately, Colorado also got dominated by Nebraska, and Colorado has struggled in a lot of games this year. They also had to pull that Baylor game out their arse. I may be giving Colorado a little bit of love here, but I think BYU is winning this football game. Don't get caught up in prime time for this one. This Colorado team could very well be a 4-loss team. Iowa versus Missouri. Missouri's still ranked, guys. Can you believe that? After barely beating Arkansas by 7 points, they're still ranked. Iowa, Caleb Johnson, sometimes really high scoring, sometimes really low scoring. Missouri, sometimes really high scoring, sometimes really low scoring. But something that has rung true for Missouri is that they have played in a lot of fabulous football games. Whether they're a good team or not, they've had some crazy finishes to games. Give me Iowa. Yeah. Caleb Johnson is having a great year for Iowa. Missouri's defense has been solid, but I think you could see a game in which these defenses actually struggle a lot against these offenses. Give me Iowa in a high-scoring affair. I'm taking the big-time underdog because this very well could be 14-10 or something like that. But give me Iowa. Iowa at Missouri again. I don't know why this matchup is being played twice. It doesn't make sense to me. But I guess they get to play each other twice. But in this matchup, I'm going to take Iowa again. I'm going to take Iowa again. More defensive this time. All right, I'm stopping now. It's supposed to say Alabama versus Michigan. Michigan and Alabama, people are obviously like, oh my God, it's the Rose Bowl from last year, which I think is kind of dumb. I think it's kind of dumb. First off, Michigan is like 7-5. And second off, Alabama is like still above ASU and SMU and the AP and whatnot in like the final college football playoff. Why is Bama playing Michigan? It's just because it was the Rose Bowl last year and Michigan beat Ohio State. If Jalen Milroe can run the ball, expect a domination. But if you can't, expect Alabama to win because Michigan does not have a good offense. Bama's just a better team here. If Michigan wins, I'd be truly surprised. But I think Alabama's the better team here. South Carolina at Illinois. This matchup is fun because both of these teams have electric teams. South Carolina has been rolling. Illinois has been struggling in a hard conference, respectfully, but they've been struggling. But they do have a very fun quarterback to watch and a fun offense. Give me a close, high-scoring game with Lenore Sellers having a fabulous game for South Carolina. That's all for the bowl games. A like and subscribe and help a comment always helps. That's all from me. Adios.